Hello, hello, hello. So I'm just continuing on the theme of kind of things that I've learned from a kind of mindset and personal development challenge since leaving my role in the NHS. And as I was saying before, the decision I took was to move into a role, a kind of full time regular role, excuse me, in a company that employs healthcare professionals to kind of do a non-clinical role. So you're kind of you're involved in sort of medically assessing people who are applying for certain types of benefits, essentially, and your role is not a kind of therapeutic one. So you're not trying to figure out what's going on with people medically and make a plan for how you're going to try and make that better. You're trying to figure out how their conditions affect their ability to function, and you're doing that against certain benchmarks put in place uh, by the legislation, essentially. Uh, so yeah, so just wanted to talk a little bit about coming from somewhere where you're quite established doing a certain thing. So I was into doing something completely new and just being open to new learning. I guess, and that that is one of the challenges associated with this kind of thing. So if you say you're coming from, like I was, you're coming from a role. So I was I was an emergency medicine doctor for many years, and I think that the thing that is in my favor in terms of like moving into a kind of new role that's not emergency medicine is that actually, as you might be aware, emergency medicine is a little bit of everything really. Um, well, it isn't. It isn't. It's a little bit of everything in theory, but actually, you spend most of your time dealing with the same things on a daily basis. Kind of on rotation. There's some things you'll see every day. Not not always the same cause underlying it. So you'll see people with chest pain every day. You'll see people with sore ankles every day. There's some things that come round a bit less frequently, but that that you'll see those from time to time. And then there's some stuff that's completely hen's teeth rare, and it is the kind of job where there's certain things that you'll only see once in a career, if you're really unlucky. So yeah, it's one of those jobs. It's unpredictable, but it's also predictable at the same time, if that makes sense. So yeah, you kind of come from being quite comfortable with uncertainty, I suppose, because I don't have any control over who's attending my my A&E department. Um, and that's one of the things I had to kind of come to terms with fairly quickly. Doing emergency medicine was coping with that kind of risk and uncertainty element of the role, which I always was, and it was always down to kind of managing that risk. And other people didn't really understand that. People always wanted certainty, but actually, the more experience you get and the longer in the tooth you get, the more you realize that certainty is actually not not a reasonable thing to expect. It just doesn't exist. Um, so yeah, being open to new learning. So as I said, moving into this role, I'd considered applying for this role a number of times before. There was a few times during my career where things were tough. Certainly when I moved from being a more junior doctor in emergency medicine into being my first year with a bit of responsibility in the emergency department was tough. That was also partly because I was working in a department where I didn't feel particularly well supported. Um, it was a real stark reminder of what the culture of feedback can be like in some organisations, NHS included, in a lot of areas, or what I experienced anyway, where you only really get told what you're doing wrong. You're not really coached. You're just kind of given a list of things that you're doing wrong and sort of slapped on the back and told to go off and do better next time. So yeah, it's not a great culture of feedback, and I certainly over time started to regard that as a bit of a threat. But anyway, I'm not talking about feedback today. I'm going to do a separate video on feedback because that's certainly something I'm experiencing a lot now. But how do you kind of open yourself up to new challenges, I guess? And that was one of the things I had to do. So I had a a whole new job role to learn, um, but I certainly had the advantage of, I'm someone who's got quite an appetite for developing myself anyway. So I guess I'm quite fortunate from that point of view, that I'm always, kind of looking to learn about new things and kind of expand my knowledge. So that really worked in my favour coming into this role. And I really just I was open to it. I didn't feel like, oh, this is going to be a real pain, blah blah blah. I was finding the content really interesting. A lot of it was, a kind of new aspect of healthcare and medicine that I'd never really explored before. About how to assess people's function in relation to their medical conditions. So I found it really interesting. Even doing the kind of early learning modules about it. And I guess maybe then, if you're not necessarily someone who's naturally wired that way, it can be way more difficult, and that might actually feed into your decision to, whether you're going to leave your role or not. Actually, could I be bothered to, putting myself through all the learning that would be involved in it? And it might be that you have to kind of consider that in your sort of reasonable, rational quotient. Um, Given that I am not someone who is open to learning, is it reasonable and rational for me to leave my current role? Probably not. And maybe you need to wait for a time when maybe you are, or maybe you can find something within you where you go, well, actually, I really want to leave this role, so I am willing to put some effort into learning the new role. And that's what I did. So I just kind of went into it. I was like, right, I'm going to throw myself into this. I'm going to immerse myself in this. And I, used with boundaries in place. So I wasn't sitting at all times of the day and night, like reading the material, but I was, when I get up early in the morning times, I was using some of that time in the morning to do a little bit of reading on topics around it. I was constantly assessing my own knowledge against things. I learned quite a lot from putting things into context. So they had quite a lot of little case examples where you had to try and get the right answer for certain things. So I kind of measured my knowledge against those, and then the bits that I was less confident about, I would either ask one of the trainers about it, or I would go off and read about it. I would just sort of test myself in different areas. I would sit sometimes and think there's quite a good technique where it's almost like it's like a pre-mortem. So you try and work out, so when I'm doing this role, what do I think the bits are where I'm going to feel really uncomfortable about it, or what bits are going to trip me up. So you can kind of do that in advance, and then you can go, right, okay, how do I then stop that happening? And you can then go off and read about those things. So yeah, you need to kind of have a little bit of an awareness of how you best learn, I suppose. And I know that I best learn, over the years. I've always been better at learning by kind of doing things fairly consistently, so little and often. Don't overwhelm my brain. Keep those kind of work-life boundaries in place. Like, no one's expecting you to sit up until 2 o'clock in the morning reading this material because you've started a new job. Find ways to embed it in your routine. I recorded, even though I don't necessarily like listening to my own voice, I recorded little bits of me reading out parts of the manual that they had given us, and also some of the self-directed learning modules that they have. So I recorded some of those because I knew, I'm commuting a lot more at the moment. So that there wasn't really any podcasts that were on the topic, but I could sort of listen to myself reading out bits from self-directed learning modules. So while I'm driving to where I need to go, whilst I'm on the bus or on the train or walking somewhere, I can be listening to knowledge as well. So just figuring out how you can sort of tap into how you best learn. I learn from mixed modalities really, but and the kind of visual auditory the thing isn't quite a kinesthetic thing isn't quite as valid as it used to be. But figure out how you like to learn and try and try and shoehorn that into your day already. You don't necessarily, as I say, need to spend hours and hours and hours when you should be sitting at home with your family or relaxing, dealing with it. But yeah, it's just about how open are you normally. How could you make yourself more open? What is your kind of preferred learning style? And just being really open to immersing yourself in whatever it is that you're trying to learn, making it part of your day-to-day life whilst giving your brain a bit of a break, and doing little and often as well. You don't need to cane it and sicken yourself of it, just do little and often. And that's certainly what worked for me. So I'd be really curious to hear what works for you from that point of view. How do you kind of open yourself up to new knowledge and new learning? And how do you like to learn? I'd be really curious to hear from you. Okay, catch you next time.